I am interviewing today, I've had the pleasure of working with all across this country on issues to lift, to edify, to use power in a very just way. From our fights within the DNC to get our Democratic Party to stand up more for the least of these,
right,
to helping other candidates, to his very own race as the Attorney General of the great state of Minnesota. Oh, and I left out how we rocked and rolled with one another on the campaign of none other Senator Bernard Sanders from the great state of Vermont.
That's right.
Now, you all probably know exactly who I am talking about. If I said George Floyd case, ding, 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 you would know exactly who I'm talking about. But he is so much more than that case. And he is an author of a new book titled Break the Wheel. I have none other than Attorney General Keith Ellison on the show today. AG, how are you doing?
Hey, good to be with you, my sister. Good to see you. And I listen to your show all the time. I love it. Please keep it up. Please keep doing it. You are a voice that we need. And anybody who's listening to you is wise to be doing it. And I hope you are subscribing and giving her all them stars and all that, because we need it.
Well, we do need it. Thank you, Attorney General. Yes, subscribe, like, become a member of TYT. Thank you. I didn't even expect the AG to put that out there. So, AG, I just want people to, they know that you're serving right now as the Attorney General of the great state of Minnesota. You were the lead, your team, and you always, you did this in a way that very few leaders would do. You allowed your great team to do their work, but you became more nationally and internationally known because of the prosecution of what happened in the George Floyd death case, the conviction of former Minnesota police officer Derek Chauvin on the charge of second-degree murder. Now, before you became the Attorney General of the great state of Minnesota, you represented them in the United States House of Representatives. It is a seat now that Rep. Ilhan Omar holds. I remember us campaigning to help her get elected. And you are an author extraordinaire. The title of the book, again, Break the Wheel, Ending the Cycle of Police Violence. Yes, our team has just put that book up. Please get that book. I am reading that book right now. It will open your eyes to so many things. It gives us a behind the scenes look at what was happening in that case and so much more. So AG, you refer to the need to end the cycle of police violence as a reckoning. And you go even further to say that it's a racial reckoning. Why this description? And do you believe our country is ready to deal with this reckoning?
Well, we certainly can. We can end police violence, but we've got to do two things. And if you don't do these two things, you might not be able to do much of anything. The first thing is you got to prosecute crime, whether the perpetrator has a badge or not. And if you have a system of impunity where some people can just murder others and never face accountability, there's no level of training or other stuff that's ever gonna work. And then the other thing you gotta do is you gotta use administrative discipline. You've gotta fire people, and you've gotta get letters in their employment file fast when they abuse the laws. And you've gotta have strict discipline. One of the things we saw in the George Floyd case involving Derek Chauvin, the man who killed him, is he had 18 excessive force complaints. And like, if somebody would have intervened with Derek Chauvin at 12, called him in the office and said, what is going on with you? Why are you having all these complaints? What are you doing wrong? You know what? He may have quit the force, he may have been fired, but he wouldn't be doing 22 and a half years in prison. George Floyd would be alive. So all this lax administrative stuff where you just don't hold people accountable, it actually makes, you're setting them up for failure. I tell you, there's one case, Senator, that the world does not know that much about, and that is a case involving John Pope, who was 14 years old when Derek Chauvin kneeled on his neck for 17 minutes.
Oh my.
Now this kid, John Pope, didn't die, but when he got, after Derek Chauvin got investigated and all the cases started coming to light, He got indicted for that crime federally and ended up having to plead guilty to it. But his administrators and his sergeants are like, oh, well, that's not a problem. So we gotta hold him accountable.
Yeah, AG, your point about, I mean, basically what you're saying is that the leadership, the temperature or the culture, if you will, right, of any law enforcement agency primarily starts at the top. And that any of the fissures or failures, that is primarily about the culture of the department itself, primarily, and not holding law enforcement officials accountable, getting them the support that they need, praising them when necessary, but making sure that you hold them accountable. But AG, there will be a group, there are certain people in this country who would say it's not law enforcement. It's unfair to expect law enforcement to solve all of the ills of this country. It's not fair to them. They under high pressure, high stress jobs. Why should they be held accountable for, this is par for the course, what happens in the streets, what they see on a regular basis, and why should they be held accountable for their actions?
Well, they have to be accountable because the Constitution to the United States says that there'll be no unreasonable searches and seizures. Basically, it means the government cannot use arbitrary violence and force against you and take your stuff. If you're gonna call yourself a democracy, not a dictatorship, not a monarchy, whatever, if you're gonna call yourself a representative democracy, you've got to have restrictions and controls on the government. And government agents, armed agents of the state, beating people with impunity means that you live in a police state. So that's why there's gotta be accountability, because the people of the United States deserve to live in a democratic nation where there's accountability under law and where there's restrictions on government action. Also, the Equal Protection Clause. You can't say that some people, it's open season on them. George Floyd is a black man who's unemployed, therefore you can do whatever you want to him. He has no rights, which a white man's bound to respect. You know what I mean? You can't, so that's why there's gotta be accountability. But here's the third reason, I just gotta tell you this. Police officers who want to protect and serve are absolutely up to doing their job right. Don't insult the men and women who serve in departments every day trying to do the right thing by saying that they can't be expected to do the right thing. There's a black woman police officer in Buffalo, New York. Her name is Carrie L. Horn. She saw her partner abusing a suspect in custody.
I remember that case.
She physically intervened and they fired her.
Yes. And
it took her 15 years to get her pension and her job back. Let's support Carrie L. Horn.
That's right. That's exactly. But AJ, you leading us down the path of, there is, going back to culture, there is this notion within law enforcement agencies that you protect at all costs. In other words, regardless of whether or not it's clear that your colleague transgressed in a way that takes somebody's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness away, being a part of the club is more important than standing up for the truth. And that is why, Ms. Horn was not supported, because she went against the internal code of law enforcement agencies. And that's unfortunate, because it does hurt good law enforcement officers. And I keep saying law enforcement because you and I know, and I know many of our viewers know, there's sheriff's department, police department, others, not just the police, it's other law enforcement agents out there trying to do their job. AG, I want to go back to something that you said about the training. There's also another thought that, we need some cultural competency, if only they had training. Now, while I do agree that law enforcement officers should get all the training that they need, but there comes a certain point, to me, that the Chauvin case is one example. What happened to George Floyd is one example of a point that I'm about to make. But I want to hear your opinion on that. Sometimes all the training in the world is not going to train hate out of your heart, or the fact that you don't respect the community that you are in fact sworn to protect and to serve. What are your thoughts? I mean, and you and I were talking before we went live about some of the worst cases have happened right here in my home city of Cleveland in the great state of Ohio. I mean, what happened to Tamir Rice comes to mind as you talk about why aren't we keeping track of people who should not be officers? I mean, the officer that shot and killed Tamir Rice should have never been hired by the Cleveland Police Department, but he was, because his previous department said this man should not be a police officer.
Unfit.
Yeah, right. But he was hired anyway. So I guess I'm putting two questions out there. Do you believe we can train hate out of somebody's heart or disdain out of somebody's heart? And then secondly, what will it take to get a national database that just tracks the record, like the true record after investigations have been done? Because I know people sometimes will lie on law enforcement too. So we're gonna put that in the parking lot. But the true record of law enforcement agents, law enforcement officers, so that everybody has a view of what this officer has done.
Well, on the first thing, I absolutely believe in training. I think training is important. I also believe that you can't train somebody to know that they need to get off somebody after 9.5 minutes after being their neck on their neck when they've been unresponsive for half that time, when they haven't said a word. I mean, when a 9-year-old girl is yelling, "Get off him!" Look, the academy doesn't supposed to make you dumber. The academy is supposed to make you smarter. Why did a 9-year-old girl and 3 17-year-old girls and other people who never went to the academy know that George Floyd needed medical intervention, but these 4 guys didn't know it? Oh, and one of them did know it. One of them even said it, but he didn't do it. So my point is, yeah, training is important, but humanity is even more important. And so, like, Officer Brillo shoots that couple 137 times. They're unarmed in a car. The only thing they did is they had the exhaust, do a, one of those, sometimes your car makes a
backfired. Yeah, the backfire. So there were officers, AG, 137 shots, but Brillo shot 40. He jumped on the hood of the car and shot 40 shots into their car. They had no weapons at all.
Standing on the hood, firing down into the car. I mean, and then the judge lets him go, right?
Yeah, this was Cleveland.
And I'm gonna tell you, I don't think a jury would have let him go. But my point is, this is not a matter of training. It's a matter of, do you respect other human beings or do you not? Are you on the department so you can use a gun and bully people and make people do what you want to do? Or are you on the department to protect and preserve life and help people who are vulnerable and need your help? And some people are and some people ain't. We need to get rid of the ones who are there for the wrong reasons. And so like, like those 5 guys who beat Tyree Nichols.
Yes.
I mean, those guys, don't need, I couldn't see them having any human compassion for him. They were literally torturing him. And so like, that's not a training problem. They had a lot of training. They were an elite training unit.
That's right.
And in Derek Chauvin's case, we showed in the trial that he had every CPR class. He had every CPR class. He knew how to administer chest compressions. Even after George Floyd went unconscious, he knew how to take a pulse, took the pulse. There was no pulse. He didn't care. So, at some point, yes, training, we need training. But a lot of these horrendous murders, they're not close calls. They are horrendous abuses of human rights. And you mentioned the Tamir Rice case. How does the Cleveland department put that man on the force? What was his name? Lowen or something like that? How does he get on the force? You got another department that says this guy is mentally unfit to be here. And you had the caller say, yeah, I don't think it's a real gun. Within seconds, he gets out the gun, blah, 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 kills a 12-year-old kid. This guy never should have been there. What we need, and what we need to do is we need to help the profession of policing, which I believe is a noble profession. I'm not anti-police at all, but I believe that it's a.
Neither am I.
Yeah, I think we need police to operate within a constitutional human rights framework. Because look, I'm a prosecutor. I know people are raped, robbed, drive-by shootings. Crime happens, and police are an important partner in protecting people. But they got to do their job constitutionally, or this is what happens. People won't call them. People won't cooperate with them, and People who commit crimes, if you're in the neighborhood saying, look, we're gonna run a drug game here, we're gonna sell dope up in here, and whoever doesn't like it, we're gonna eliminate them with violence. Now, the people who live in that neighborhood are gonna be like, I don't want these criminals doing this stuff, but I'm nervous about what the police are gonna do when they show up. You can't.
It has to be a trust factor. I mean, the police need the community, and the community needs the police. AG, in your book, Break the Wheel, you give us a behind the scenes look at what happened during the Chauvin case. Are there any other like highlights or things that you want to uplift for people who are going to read this book, who have not read this book, but just to give them a taste of more, because you're giving it to us, but just a few things that you would like to highlight about the book itself?
You know what, Nino, I was so impressed with those ordinary, regular people who stopped to raise their voices and to pull out their cell phones and take what happened to George Floyd. This is a man they didn't know. They didn't know him. He was just a human being suffering, and they stopped and they did the best they could to try to protect his life. Then they show up a year later to testify about what they saw. To me, if you're ever cynical about whether people are good or not, all you need to do is look at those people on that corner. And here's the thing, Nina. Some were black, some were white, some were Latino. It was a bouquet of humanity. Some were kids, some were older. And so it was everybody. And then when the people were protesting what happened to George Floyd, that was a multiracial group. Even though everybody knew this happened to a black person, they said, I might not be black, but I think this is wrong, and I'm gonna get in the street with my sign and raise my voice. So, those are things that I want people to feel like hope about, right? This is a tragedy, but there's hope after tragedy. If we organize, if we get together, if we see each other as each other's fellow human being, there are great things that can happen. And we need to keep the pressure on Congress. There's no excuse for them not passing the George Floyd Justice Policing Act.
None at all.
And you just mentioned the national database, the national registry, to enter those bad cops into that registry so they can't leave one department and just go to another. You asked me about that a moment ago, and I just want to make clear that's in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
Yeah, we need it. I mean, we absolutely need it. And it will help law enforcement too, because most law enforcement officers, like any profession, you don't want bad people there. You want people who are noble, because it hurts everybody. AG, and my final question for you during this interview, and hopefully you'll come back and be with us, is a lot of people are cynical right now. They really have lost hope in systems, period, but especially the legal system. I know we're talking about policing, but there's an entire legal system from from the courts to the streets. We're talking about the street side, which happens to be police and sheriffs and the other law enforcement agencies. What would you say to people? I guess you already gave an example about the bystanders that came to the rescue of George Floyd. But what would you say to people who would say, Attorney General, we like all the recommendations that you are making. We like what you're saying in this book about how we change things, how we end police violence. But you know what, sir? I don't believe that this is ever gonna happen. I don't believe that we can do this as a nation. What would you say to people who want to get involved, but they don't believe that their involvement will make a difference?
Well, Rosa Parks didn't think that segregation was ever gonna end, but she still said, I'm not moving and I don't care, and we're gonna take this as far as we can take it. Martin Luther King said the same thing, Malcolm X said the same thing. All of our ancestors who ever stood up for freedom didn't know what the outcome was gonna be. They weren't guaranteed that there were gonna be love and peace and nirvana, but they stood up anyway, and that's what we must do now. This is an organizing moment. Get involved now. And if you start now, you never know where we might take it. We might see a new birth of freedom in this country.
I know that's right. All of you, we have been graced by the presence of Attorney General Keith Ellison from the great state of Minnesota. He is the author of the book, Break the Wheel, Ending Police Violence in America. You need to pick up that copy. Go online, pick up the copy of this book and read it and become part of the solution by learning from one of the greatest attorney generals ever. And yes, I am very biased, but one of the greatest attorney generals ever. You know, AG Ellison, the great state of Minnesota is blessed to have you, but we as citizens, as people in the United States of America are very blessed to have you as well. You showed in a time of great turmoil. We know that the marches that hit internationally because of what happened to George Floyd, it is, sir, I believe because of you and the team that you led, that you restored some hope in this country and you lit the path that change is, systemic change is absolutely possible if we have people in elected spaces and activist spaces who are willing, ready, and able to use the power to do good. And you, sir, have certainly used your power in many offices to do so much good in the world.
Love you, Nina.